And I was a 28-year-old captain at the time. I had to get everything right. The analysis had to be perfect. Everything we did on execution had to be perfect. And I had a bias for analysis before we would step off, because I took command very seriously. I didn't want to get my guys hurt or killed. I wanted the mission. And Homer would say to me, he would get so mad at me. He would say, "Damn it, sir. You got all you got to get. You're going to get. Ruck up and let's start walking. We'll figure the rest out as we go." And it took me a while to realize that he was absolutely right. Is that in the arena, when we're competing in the arena, particularly in times of complexity and chaos, we are never going to get the amount of information that we feel like we need to make a decision or to execute, And I had to learn in combat over time that probably the best I was ever going to get prior to stepping off was 70%.
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners. Today, I am honored to have a true American hero on the podcast. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann is a U.S. Army Green Beret, serving for 23 years. After that, and this is actually how we met, he was turned storyteller. He's the founder of Rooftop Leadership, which is also a great podcast you have to listen to. He's a best-selling author. He's a playwright, an actor of an incredible show that we're going to talk about called Last Out, as well as the founder of something that has been in the news a lot over the past year, and that is Task Force Pineapple, an advocacy group for our abandoned Afghan allies. In fact, Scott has a brand new book out called Operation Pineapple Express, which is launching August 30th. Scott, my friend, welcome to the Business of Advice podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Cody. It's good to see you again, pal.
Yeah, you too. And man, you do a lot of stuff. I was just reading through all that, so it's impressive what you've been able to accomplish. And I know we're going to jump into some of the things that are near and dear to your heart, which are honestly just a lesson in leadership, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. So I appreciate all that you've done for our country, not only when you were in duty, but I think even more so after you've left here over the past year.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's funny. I was listening to you read that, and I thought, I told my wife I was retiring when we left forces, and I don't think that's exactly how it worked out. But my dad always says that, this period of time that you and I are in right now in our life, he says it's really the most productive period of your life because you reach this age where you actually somewhat know what you're doing, and you're still young enough to do something about it. And I feel like that's where I am right now.
Yeah, it's a great spot to be in. I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Well, maybe starting us off, just to give us a little background, I'd love to hear you just talk about what drew you to military service, and then love to hear a little bit about what led you down the path to becoming a Green Beret.
It all kind of happened at the same time. I was a kid, really. I was 14 when I decided to become a Green Beret. I grew up in a little logging town in Mount Ida, Arkansas. My dad was a forest ranger, so we moved in all these little logging towns throughout the South and the Southeast, and a Green Beret in this little town walked into our soda shop one day, and I was in there with a bunch of other kids, and the second he was in his dress uniform, and the second he walked in with his blouse jump boots and ribbons and that weird looking green hat on his head, I knew immediately that was what I was going to do. And I didn't even know what that was. I just knew, and I was a really scrawny runt, barely able to even get noticed in that town. And we moved about every couple of years. And so I was always kind of on the outside looking in and just felt kind of invisible, really. I talk about that. That's a line I put in the play, but I just felt but when I saw this guy, I knew I was looking at me 20 years later. And so his name was Mark, and he sat down with me and he explained to me what he did. And, that was pretty cool in itself, just having this like warrior that everybody was gawking at sit down with this, little dude that's like 105 soaking wet. And he started telling me about Green Berets, and that's what he was. And that they work by, with, and through indigenous people. They're way different than the SEALs or the Rangers or the Delta Force guys who go in and, they take down a target really quick and they come off the target and they do the mission themselves. He was like, Green Berets are they're all about working with indigenous tribes and villages and communities, and they help them stand up on their own. And I just fell in love with that, the whole Lawrence of Arabia feel to it, and this whole little guy against the big guy thing. And so I'm at 14, like that's it. I never wavered, and I immediately went home and started researching special forces, and it became my obsession until the day I retired.
It's interesting how important having someone who models something can be in our lives. It's a big part of what I see is being able to see other people do it and inspire you to it. So
I tell people that all the time, Cody, and it's really true. And whether you're in the military or not, it doesn't really matter. The fact is that people are watching us all the time.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example. There's a guy that right down the road from me here who is a nuclear engineer, like worked in the Navy shipyards, highly paid, highly respected young man. But the guy he looks up to more than anything else since he was a kid is a financial advisor. And the guy had always just been like his hero, and he looked up to him, and he loved that work. He left the world of nuclear shipbuilding to become a financial advisor this year. Wow. Right. And I just, you don't realize the impact that you have on people, that your stories have on people, and that just more importantly, how you run your miles. People are always watching, and it's more about what you do than what you say. That's for sure.
Well, that may be a good transition. As you look back on your time in the Army and with the Green Berets, were there leadership traits that you feel like separated, I'll just say, the Green Berets from civilians? Are there things that you learned there that you think civilians need to model better?
I think in some ways there are some. So here's the way I would describe it. Like what I learned that taught me how to be a Green Beret, I learned from my mom and my dad, and growing up in those little towns and just being a good human. So everything that I needed to be a Green Beret, I had, and I was gifted that by some very, very special people in my life who just taught me how to be a good human. But what combat and that type of, by definition, Green Berets are dropped into low trust areas that are high risk and high stakes. So you're not going to go into a first world country that is trying to decide where they're going to hold their Olympic Games, right? Yep. You're that's what Delta, and they're going to look for where threats are. But Green Berets, you're going to drop them into the worst, most volatile place on planet. And by worst, I mean the most at risk. And then they're going to walk in with just 12 guys, and they're going to build relationships and connections with the locals. And they're going to try to get a sense of the sources of instability that are going on, and build trust. And then over time, incrementally, help them stand up on their own until the point that they can stand up by themselves. And then the Green Berets work themselves out of a job. Now, all of that, and by the way, most of the time you're getting shot at, or you're eating improvised explosive devices or whatever, because guerrillas who also thrive in those at-risk areas don't like you in their backyard.
Yep.
And that's why, for example, post 9/11 Green Berets have had more killed in action than Delta, SEAL Team 6, Rangers, and Marine Special Ops combined. And it's not because they're any braver, it's because of their prolonged exposure in these at-risk areas. So I tell you all that because what it did offer me was an accelerated petri dish of human dynamics, right? So when you talk about low trust, I'm talking you have 5 seconds to make a connection, or somebody's going to pull an AK on you. And you there's just no room for casual endeavors. Like, it is very deliberate, very intentional, and very high stakes. And so in that environment, learning how to be a combat advisor, how to move people to action that you have no authority over, how to inspire them to do things they otherwise wouldn't do, those skills were very, very useful to me when I came home into the civilian world. But more importantly, as I started to look around our country, it started to look to me like a lot of the social conditions that were eroding around us here at home were very similar to these low trust, high risk places in Afghanistan. Even in corporate boardrooms, the erosion of trust, the in-group, out-group behavior, the tribal behavior that we're showing as Americans right now, the division, I mean, that's all the stuff that I grew up in. And so I
Yeah.
understand it. And I think a lot of Americans don't understand it. They're looking there, scratching their head going, this is not the country I knew 5 years ago. And it's not. So in that sense, I feel really blessed because I believe that where we're trending as a society right now looks a lot more like Afghanistan than it does the US. And what got us here ain't going to get us there. I think the leadership needed is more akin to like what I learned as a Green Beret. And that's what I'm trying to do for the rest of my days, is to help people get a sense of that so they can put it into play for their own lives.
Well, I would tell you, shameless plug for your podcast, Rooftop Leadership, because that's been my go-to over the past year. You know, I've heard you talk a lot about this, the lack of trust, and so everyone should go listen to that. There's so many great episodes around that. But I know you actually wrote a book a little bit about this, kind of the tribes. You have a TED Talk on it.
Yeah.
On this idea of building connection and trust, what are some tangible ways that and I'll even use this, you know, an advisor has someone walks in who may not trust them, you know, right away, and they have to establish that rapport and trust and gain that quickly. What are some tangible ways to do that?
First of all, is like take a page from what our friend Bo Eason says, which is we need to get back to our nature, right? The more technical and the more advanced and modern our society gets, which is happening, you know, more and more every day, the more as leaders, I think we need to really focus on our nature. And I'll be more specific, is we need to look at human dynamics, human terrain. For example, if you think of humans, Cody, as an iceberg, like our human nature is a big iceberg. Well, the tip of that iceberg is the modern world. And, you know, it's the Zoom calls, it's the cash flow reports, it's the soccer games after school, it's binge watching Game of Thrones. It's everything that we know and understand about the world, but it's only like 20% of who we are in terms of our nature. Our real capability, the opportunities and the threats that exist for us are below the waterline on that iceberg. It's the part that sunk the Titanic. It's 80% of that iceberg that you can't see. And that human has been around for a couple of 100,000 years, depending on your beliefs. You know, it's a human that is focused on meaning, on emotion, on social connection, storytelling, and struggle. In other words, we're a mess. Meaning, emotion, social, storytelling, and struggle. And I just think as a general approach to life, if you can get below that waterline and meet people where they are around meaning, emotion, connection, storytelling, struggle, you're going to have a much more profound connection with the human across from you. Doesn't matter what the industry is, doesn't matter whether you're doing this as an advisor or whether you're doing this as a father talking to his teenage daughter. If you got to make a human connection below that waterline, and until you do that, in this time of low trust, the other party's going to smell you a mile away, and they're going to know it's transactional, and they're going to put their plates up to defend.
You mentioned Bo, who's a mutual friend of ours, and he's been on the podcast, talks a lot about storytelling. You've obviously mastered this in a big way too. Are there some things that you think people have to get right, especially as a leader, when it comes to storytelling?
I do. I think, first of all, the term that I've started, because when I teach human connection, I teach it as it pertains in real time. You know, I mean, because whether you're speaking from the stage or whether you're sitting down across from a prospect, or like I said, your teenage daughter who's been bullied, you know, in cyberspace, right? And you've got to make a connection. It's high stakes. There's no room for error. I believe it's what we do in real time that matters, right? And so what I call storytelling, what I've started using is narrative competence. And it's the ability to apply purposeful storytelling in real time to meet your goals. And there are some things about storytelling that I think all of us should probably understand. First of all, understand that our brain, Cody, is a metaphorical pattern matching organ. So that means that everything your brain does, your listener's brain does, is it's going to tell itself a story first, right? That's the key. That's why getting below the waterline is so important, is that no matter what kind of PowerPoint you show, there's a recent study by David Phillips in his talk, Death by PowerPoint, that within 30 seconds of you showing your PowerPoint, 90% of it is forgotten because it engages working memory. Storytelling engages long-term, right? So right out of the gate, it is a sense-making tool. And our ancestors have used storytelling as a sense-making tool for thousands and thousands of years. So if you understand how storytelling works, you understand the construct of it and the process for it, then you automatically, when your listener starts to hear you, they're going to lean in differently. They're going to listen to you differently because they know story. They got 70,000 years of DNA that, like, boom. That's like when Bo tells a story, you automatically know he's a storyteller. And it's the body that knows. And so I tell people, look, if you really want to own a room, if you want to influence, you want to inspire, you have got to be a storyteller. And it's not like instinctive this one time at band camp or hold my beer kind of storytelling. Like, this is purposeful storytelling in real time to meet your goals. And that's number one. So really getting clear and being deliberate and intentional about your role as a storyteller and train on it. Number two is there is a rule out there, and Bo talks about it, but it's actually a universal rule in storytelling, is what's personal is universal, right? It really is important to understand that if it's personal to you, it's going to matter to the other party. I guarantee it, right? And then the other one that I've been talking about a lot to particularly anybody who, like advisors, but anyone who has to move people to action and maybe you don't have authority over them, is a lot of times it's not the stories you tell, but the stories you ask to hear. Particularly as we reemerge from COVID and everybody's kind of like coming out of storm shelters. I mean, you're in the Midwest, you know what that's like. Like, you kind of come out, you sniff the air, and you kind of make sure that there's not another one around the horizon, and you're just trying to kind of sort everything out. Right now, the way we ask questions of the people around us and let them tell you their story. Just be an empathetic witness. Don't try to judge it. Don't try to criticize. Just ask questions that let people tell you their story. That, to me, more than anything else right now, is what people need from leaders.
Hey, that's a good maybe follow-up question to that. Obviously, there's been a lot go on over the last few years, and you've talked a lot about the direction you see us heading and kind of this tribal situation we're falling into. Are there any things that we should be taking out of that we can do in our respective roles as leaders to, I don't want to say change the direction of where our country's headed, but just maybe within our own sphere of influence, things that we should be doing to turn some of this around?
Yeah, man. I mean, I love that. And I believe that, again, bringing it down to a personal level, the first thing I think is to remember that, yes, fear is contagious, but so is leadership. Leadership is contagious. And so thinking deliberately and intentionally about how we lead, and honestly, the people who need our leadership the most are the endeavors where we don't have a title, or the title is dad or mom or husband or wife or neighbor. That's where leadership, to me, is like lacking, and it's lacking everywhere, but it's certainly lacking there.
Yep.
And just showing up as a leader, and it is contagious. There's a couple other things that I think to understand is that the human condition, and I saw this a lot in combat, but now it's true here too, is when we become afraid, because we're meaning-seeking creatures, and we're always looking for resources and making sure we can survive, and that primal brain is always on alert. And we've conditioned ourselves in this modern society to be afraid all the time. People are walking around in a constant state of fear, and social media feeds it. The 24-hour news cycle feeds it, but we feed it too. And so we feed that fear, and fear-based behavior is an automatic return below the waterline. It takes you into that sympathetic state of your nervous system where you're in fight, flight, or freeze all the time. And that's cool if you're in a car wreck and you got to dig your family out, but it's not cool if you're watching your 401k erode over a year. Like, that's not an appropriate response, fear-based behavior. And so what happens is, when we stay in that, we go into a trance-like state, man. And so we are in survival mode. And when you are in that state, you look like you don't trust yourself, and nobody else can trust you. And so it actually is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So fear-based behavior and learning to recognize it and get yourself out of that trance, and then manage the emotional temperature of other humans. That's number one, is really thinking about emotions and fear and how we lead ourselves and how we help other people manage that trance and that emotion. And then the other thing I would just say is, my experience has been people follow leaders who are relatable to their pain and relevant to their goals. That's who we are drawn to. And, people are in so much pain these days that if you can just take the time to ask thoughtful, open-ended questions and be an empathetic witness to the person across from you and just get clear on their pain. I tell folks, like, you're really not in a position to negotiate or influence or do anything until you're clear on the other party's pain, you're relatable to it, and they see that you're relatable to it, and you get them, and you are at least clear on what their goals are, even if you don't agree with them. Like, if you don't know those two things, you're really irrelevant to them.
That's really good.
Yeah, I think from a leadership perspective, I'm asking myself all the time, am I relatable to their pain? Am I relevant to their goals? Am I relatable to their pain? Am I relevant to their goals? And if I'm not, I need to just get there before I try to do anything else.
Another big part of leadership is decision making. And I think one of the things I've learned is a lot of times you have to make decisions, especially over the past few years, in stressful situations. A lot of times you don't have all the information you may need. Obviously, that is an environment that you lived in for decades. Any good advice you have on how to approach leading during turbulent times or just making smart decisions when you don't have all the information you need?
I was just at a team reunion. We hadn't been together in 21 years. It was my original SF team. And we had my team sergeant, he's still around. He was 51 at the time. Pretty up in years to be a team sergeant.
Yeah.
The wisest, he was the team daddy, the wisest guy on the team, the guy with the most experience, had the most combat. And his call sign was Homer because he looked just like Homer Simpson. And I was a 28-year-old captain at the time. I had to get everything right. The analysis had to be perfect. Everything we did on execution had to be perfect. And I had a bias for analysis before we would step off because I took command very seriously. I didn't want to get my guys hurt or killed. I wanted the mission. And Homer would say to me, he would get so mad at me. He would say, "Damn it, sir. You got all you got to get. You're going to get. Ruck up and let's start walking. We'll figure the rest out as we go." And it took me a while to realize that he was absolutely right. It's like that, in the arena, when we're competing in the arena, particularly in times of complexity and chaos, we are never going to get the amount of information that we feel like we need to make a decision or to execute, And I had to learn in combat over time that probably the best I was ever going to get prior to stepping off was 70%.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean you won't get the rest of it, but you have to, at that point, you have to have a bias for action. And it's in the realm of execution. If you're able to talk to yourself and talk to your teammates and learn as you move, that you will execute more effectively and do more effectively as you're moving. I mean, that's what happened with Pineapple. Like, we didn't know anything.
Yeah.
Right? But by the time we got to the, 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, we were exceptionally proficient in what we were doing. And it was because we all had a bias for execution. We all had spent decades doing that kind of work, and we trusted the process. So I think that's probably, in this time of information, let's just leave it at that. Analysis paralysis is what we really have to guard against, because we're never going to get the amount of information that we're going to feel like we need to have order. So the question becomes, what's your threshold? Like, what's your mission decision line that you're going to step off and have a bias towards execution? Because if you don't, in this day and age, people are going to pass you and out execute you every time.
That makes sense. Hey, as you've transitioned, obviously, from military service into coaching, you speak to a lot of large corporations.
Yeah.
What are some of the lessons or principles that are the same between those two? And then what are some that are maybe different? Or maybe what are things that you wish people in a boardroom could take from, people that are in military service?
Yeah, I think so that's a great question. I mean, first of all, the science backs it up that we as humans, we are remarkably similar in how we're wired to interact with each other. So it doesn't matter ethnicity religion, socioeconomic status, or economic discipline. And I have taught and spoke and given keynotes in every industry out there. And I will tell you, we're all wired the same. That's why that below the waterline metaphor is so important, because that's where people live. People live in meaning. People live in emotion. People live in connection. People live in story, and people live in struggle. Like, that's where we are. And as a leader, as a dad, as a husband, if I'm going to move people and them trust me and have, accelerate trust and take action of sticking their jugular out, then I got to meet them down there, not where I want them to be up top, right? The tip of the iceberg, we'll get there, but I have to meet them down below that waterline. And so that is universal. That is a universal reality. And the more we can dig into that and really move the needle from instinct to skill on what is it about, for example, let's take meaning for a second, okay? We're the most meaning-seeking creatures on the planet, right? Humans, we navigate the world by trying to assign meaning to everything that we do. And if we can't assign meaning to it, we're probably not going to do it. And other mammals don't do that. They're just trying to meet their needs, right? But we are trying to get meaning out of it. Well, think about that, the profundity of that. But yet, to be these goal-oriented creatures, like 92% of our goals in life are never met, and so how do we work with meaning and why and purpose in these modern complex times? You never hear leaders these days talking about why we're doing something, why the organization is doing this, why it's important to do that. We leave it out. We leave meaning and why out of the vision and where we're going. And even if we do communicate it, it's usually once a year in a vision meeting. But we're, in Ranger School and in special operations, every mission statement you have, I don't care if it's an F-16 sortie into Syria or a truck convoy to Camp Lejeune, every mission statement has two things: task and purpose. Task and purpose, what and why. And the lowest ranking soldier in that entire formation knows why they're there. And if you ask them when they're awarded for valor or going above and beyond the call of duty, they'll tell you every time, didn't want to let my buddies down, and I knew why I was there. And when people know why they're doing something, they will rise to the highest level. But yet, in this time of great resignation and disengagement, we never talk about it. And so that, to me, is an example of how, just like the most basic, fundamental, primal element of leadership and what makes humans take action, meaning, leaders have completely left it out. They oftentimes, I find that leaders at a very senior level, they don't even know why they do what they do anymore. They've been doing it for so long and taking care of so many people, they have no clarity of their own purpose. And people smell that a mile away. They know, you know when someone's not clear on their purpose. So, yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts? Like, what do you see when it comes to meaning and purpose these days in leadership?
No, that was great. And actually it had me, I made a little note. One of the things I tell, the advisors that we support all the time, let me back up. I think, being an advisor and doing it well is one of the most noble professions, because you're helping people through some of the most, some of the toughest decisions that they're going to make in their life. And I say this all the time. I see our advisors, I have these conversations with them. They're one of the first phone calls when a spouse gets diagnosed with cancer or Alzheimer's or just all these different things that are there for people. And I say this to them all the time. Some do it well, some don't, but it ties back into this purpose that if you're not sharing those stories on a weekly basis with your team about why we do what we do and the impact that we're able to have on people, and the advisors that do that well, who can communicate just the impact that they're having on people, especially in times like that. I've shared this story before, but I was with one of our advisors and he got a phone call, and the lady's husband had literally passed away an hour before that. And he told her, like, call Bill, he'll take care of everything. Right. So I'm like, dude, you got to go back and tell your team, like, we're the first person she called when her husband passed away because she knew we would take care of her, right? So just it's such a cool opportunity. I think so often we don't do a good job of tying it back into that purpose of what we're here for.
And I love that. Let me give you just an outside industry validation of what you just said. Like, I train advisors all over the world, and not just financial advisors. I train combat advisors. I train advisors in the medical profession, but here's the thing about advisors, and this is what I've found to be fascinating. Doesn't matter what word goes in front of the advisor.
Yep.
Look at the role of an advisor. What is it that they actually do? I mean, they trade and deal in dreams, right? They work at an aspirational level. People are trusting you with their aspirations. And I don't care what you pull it apart. Look at any discipline where a true advisor, even a combat advisor, if I sit down with a villager in Afghanistan and I have any hope at all that guy's going to go up on a rooftop and fight alongside me, if he thinks for a second that I'm not invested in his dreams and what he believes in, there's no way in hell he's going to go up on that roof and fight. Why would he? Right. But if we get a sense that someone is bought into our dreams and aspirations and they get it and they're fighting for it, they will literally run through walls. Like there's nothing they won't do, and they will trust you to levels like what you just described.
Yeah.
And that is such a sacred, powerful thing, but we're running so hard these days that I'm not sure we're even conscious of it all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Well, if there's one big takeaway for everyone, tying back into that purpose is huge. I want to talk about something else that you've done that's really, really cool. I guess following your retirement, let's say your retirement from the U.S. Army. Obviously, you're not retired in any way, shape, or form, but you've stayed very involved in supporting veterans, and you wrote an incredible play called Last Out, which really focuses on helping veterans and their loved ones understand kind of PTSD and the impact of when they come back home. That has been turned into a film. I know even when we were talking right before this, you have some exciting news around that. I know it's a film that we've supported, and it's just it's been a cool way that you've done this. But would you just share a little bit about like what led you to want to do that versus kind of the journey you've been on? Because I know that thing kind of launched and COVID hit, and then you turned it into a movie, and now you have some exciting news around that too.
Yeah, I mean, Green Beret to playwright to actor, that's like the ultimate midlife crisis.
Yeah.
But I have to say, Cody, first of all, I appreciate you bringing it up. My transition from the military was not good at all. I thought it would be. I thought I had a great plan, but the reality was I was not talk about purpose and meaning again. I lost my connection to my purpose and my meaning and then my identity. And before long, I was standing in a closet 18 months after I got out of the Army holding a .45 pistol and no intention of coming out of there. And, it got really dark for me. And it was a couple of mentors over time who helped me realize that I still had a story to tell. I still had a voice. One of them was our mutual friend, Bo Eason, NFL football player turned playwright turned actor, who really showed me that it's that pain and that TNT in your belly that you can turn into something good. And you can actually use your story to bridge all those gaps that you feel right now. And so I started writing this play. He kind of pushed me on it, but it was really more for my own healing and my own catharsis. But it was about a Green Beret team sergeant that was based on 3 team sergeants that I'd had that didn't make it home from war. And, Danny Patton, and he's killed in the very first scene, and he's trying to ascend to the warrior resting place of Valhalla. But he's stuck between his fire base and his living room in the Afghan war, and he can't let go. And so some buddies of his come down from Valhalla, from warrior heaven, and who've already been killed, and they become the people in his life that made his heart pump the most blood. And they take Danny back through his life. And in doing so, he's able to figure out what it is that he's holding on to and ultimately let go and ascend and know peace. And I felt led to write that. I knew from the very beginning that was the story. But I really wanted to write it, if I'm being candid. I didn't want to write it for veterans. I wanted to write it for civilians, because I felt like in this country that we're in, through no fault of the civilian population, we have fought a secret war for 20 years, and no one truly understood the impact of war on this very, very small percentage. I mean, only 775,000 out of 340 million fought in Afghanistan, but they fought for 20 years. So, what was the impact on their family and their child? And so I wrote that, and, incrementally over, it took me 5 years. And I did a scene on the Silly Band from the play at a community theater here in Florida. And it really just brought the house down, and people loved it. And my wife and I kind of shrugged our shoulders and we're like, okay, I guess we're going to put it together. And that's what we did. We took it to 16 cities across the country, and then COVID shut it down, but not before we did, I think, 250 PTS interventions in the lobbies.
Yeah.
Gold Star families honored. And then once COVID shut it down, we raised another $250,000 and we shot our own film, and now it's on Amazon Prime.
Yeah. Well, and I know you have some exciting news. Gary Sinise has kind of connected around it, and there's going to be some stuff coming out there, huh?
Yeah. More to follow on that. But bottom line is Gary saw it. He saw the film during the Afghan departure. I mean, when you watch the film, you will think like this was written after the Afghanistan collapse, but it wasn't. We just knew it. We knew what was going to happen. And so when we wrote it, like it plays like the collapse. And Gary saw it and he thought, man, he had done a similar thing, Cody, with Tracers. I don't know if you ever heard about in his book, Grateful American. There was a play called Tracers written by a guy named John DeFusco, a Vietnam veteran, shortly after the Vietnam War. And he put it in the VFW Playhouse in California in 1980. Gary, who was very moved by the Vietnam generation, saw it and brought it to Steppenwolf Theater, where they performed it in Chicago. At the time, Steppenwolf was just a little theater. It was not the world-renowned theater it was then, but it really changed the way people thought about Vietnam, and it really opened people's eyes, civilians in particular, to what this was, and it validated the veterans. Well, when I read Gary's book, I was writing the play, and I thought, well, hell, it's already been done. Like, we could do this. And when I told Gary that, after he was kind enough to call me, and I said, I think this could be the post 9/11 Tracers, especially after the collapse of Afghanistan. He said, okay, well, let's do it. And I was like, well, I'm not doing the play anymore. It's done. It's on Amazon now. And he goes, well, what would it take to do it, for you to get back into it? And I said, well, Steppenwolf. And he goes, done. So and I was like, damn it. But yeah, so that's where we are, and we're going to bring it back, and it's going to tour. I don't know all the details yet, but I think it's going to be a really beautiful production, and I think people are going to be really proud of it. Well, all veterans in the cast.
That's awesome. And I love how, because I know you and I talked a lot as you were launching that, how you had support there to deal with people who were struggling with PTSD, at the play, became a huge part of it. And I know you saved a lot of lives because of it. So
I feel like it did. It certainly changed lives. And I've been told that it saved lives.
Yeah.
The stories and the interventions themselves did. We also honored 75 Gold Star families on the road, and we intend to honor a lot more this time around. But I just think more than anything else, man, it's storytelling. And as we come out of Afghanistan, I just read a survey. If you get a chance, I'll send it to you, but it's called After Kabul, but it's by the More in Common Foundation. But they did a survey of veterans and civilians on the impact of the Afghan withdrawal. And, just a couple of stats coming out of that: 77 or 78% of Afghan war veterans feel betrayed. And another 70% of civilians and veterans feel like veterans are going to need help moving on past Afghanistan. Most civilians are willing to do it, but over 80% of civilians say they never have any contact with veterans. And so, again, this play is a way to put communities back together, man, regardless of politics, regardless of race, regardless of pro-war. And it doesn't matter. It's about coming together around service and sacrifice and shared perspective. And we do a talk back after every performance. And I just think it's what the country needs, not just in this play, but in how we engage each other as storytellers and leaders. We've got to start sharing perspective. And I hope this play does that.
That's good. Well, I'm proud of you, and I'm excited to see it back on the road. Something else you've got big that you're working on. So since a play wasn't enough, you decided to write a book. So you have a book coming out, Operation Pineapple Express, and we could probably talk about the events that led up to the Taliban retaking Kabul and us trying to evacuate staff and allies out for a while. But maybe it's just a common starting point. Would you set the stage a little so we can understand the events that led up to that I would say chaotic evacuation of the United States from Afghanistan? Then we'll jump in a little to the book and some of the exciting things that you have done.
Yeah, I mean, just a straight up apolitical context set for this thing. But basically, we were in Afghanistan for 20 years. trying to help the Afghan people stand up for themselves. And really under the Trump administration, really all the way back to 2014, there was a move to get out of there and have the Afghan people take the lead themselves, which is not at all a bad thing, but there was a failure on the part of the senior leaders in the military, diplomats, and certainly the politicians as to the ability, capability, and capacity for the Afghans to stand on their own. And so a political decision was made under the Trump administration, carried out in the Biden administration, to get out of there lock, stock, and barrel on a deal that was set with the Taliban and not the Afghan government. Right? It was brokered in Qatar with, Doha with just the Taliban. And so the fix was in. And in June of 2021, the contractors in the Afghan military that were provided by us, that kept the platforms flying, the intelligence, the air support, they were pulled. And then all the other forces were pulled out, and there was just a residual force left. So the Taliban made their move. They knew they could make it. And by August 15, 2021, the Taliban were at the gates of the U.S. Embassy. So the whole thing became a non-combatant evacuation of service members, diplomats, and at-risk allies. But the problem was it was not planned. The National Security Council memo on it went out on 14 August. So it was, unfortunately, a poorly planned mission. The people who executed did the best they could, and they were very much heroes. But the plan was terrible. And what ended up happening was these units and organizations and government workers and Afghans who had, even American citizens who were at risk, couldn't get the government to answer the phone. The airfield was the only way out, and there were only a handful of Americans guarding it, thousands of people crowding the gates. So the calls went out to guys like me, who were former partners, to try to help them get out. And that's where we were mid-August this time last year.
So there was a line in your book that's just, you were speaking to James, who's an American that was helping with the operation, and you told him, I think you said, like, the government should be working to get all the allies out, and he says, they're not. Scott, the cavalry isn't coming, and we need a leader or it won't work, which I think that a lot of that was this moment that led to Operation Pineapple. Would you just talk a little bit about that moment and the first steps that you took after that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it started like it did with anyone else. A friend called me. He was an Afghan commando in duress, hiding in his uncle's apartment like Anne Frank, and had no way out. And I didn't want anything to do with Afghanistan. Again, I retired 10 years prior. I was not happy with where it was going. I left as a lieutenant colonel and didn't want anything to do with it. And so I was very reluctant to get involved again. But, to me, a promise had been made, and we don't leave people behind. And he was a friend. So we put a little team together and we managed to get him out. But then it just blew up. Like, then everybody started calling. And this is when James with the hat asked me that question. And because we went from like 5 people guiding these partners to 150. And I was thinking, I am a 53-year-old storyteller. I don't want anything to do with this. Like, I don't need this in my life right now. And James said, well, you know what? It doesn't matter what you think, because you're in it, and you're either going to lead this or you're not. So make it. I mean, he was pretty hard on me, and he needed to be. And it was in that moment that I had to make a decision. Am I going to go back to this world that I walked away from and try to honor a promise, or am I going to, high five my buddies that we got Nizam out and be done? And I chose the former, and I'm still involved in it to this day. It's been quite a ride, but that was how Pineapple formed. It was a task force. Actually, the word pineapple was the code word that they gave Nizam inside the gate to say before he was tossed out. We were screaming into the phone for him to say it. He said it, and he got in, and then we assigned that name to our task force. But we were one among many amazing volunteer groups doing the best they could to present these folks responsibly to the guards at the gate who had no idea who they were.
Yeah. I have a question, and it's a little bit of I guess you could apply to a business too, but this was a mission that I would say scaled very quickly. So you went from saving, one or a couple individuals to then ending up saving over thousands. It was really done You organized this with kind of volunteers from around the world in a war zone where you didn't have a lot of logistics, feet on the ground, and had all these political things going on. What did it take to scale that and have the success that you had with it?
I think it took kind of an old school and new school approach that is very applicable to anything that we're going through in life right now, because we all deal with complexity, right? We're all dealing with chaos and complexity. It doesn't matter what the arena is. It's just the world we live in. There are no more linear problems. I don't think. I think the bulk of what we deal with is complexity. So we were facing somewhere between complexity and chaos. And so what were a few of the principles that I think we leveraged that could be leveraged in any chaotic situation, to include the next pandemic or the next economic crisis, is number one is you build trust when risk is low, not when it's high. That's the first rule of special forces and, frankly, leadership. Humans are social creatures. Relationships are commodities. And if you try to build them when risk is high, they're going to smell you a mile away and you're going to be in trouble. So you build trust when risk is low. And that has to be very deliberate, because we never have time for that, do we? Because we got too much to do. We only care about building trust when it's like, hey, buddy, and the reality is the relationship is the asset. And so if you think about what we were able to do, is we weren't in country, but we had been in country for 20 years. We knew these men and women. They trusted us. We knew where they were. And so we already had that social capital in place. And, whether I was picking up a phone and dialing an 82nd Airborne commander inside the wire who I'd worked with, or whether I was talking to a commando like Nizam who was huddling with his family in a sewage canal, trust was established. And even in situations where, like, I might be talking to someone that didn't know me, there would be a bona fide passed from another guy that says, hey, Scott's a good dude, you can trust him, and he's going to move you to this location. And there was an immediate transfer of that social capital. So that's the first thing I would say, is no matter how technological we get, how advanced we think we are, we build trust when risk is low, and relationships are the asset. Like, that is the end all be all portfolio that we got to have. It's in hard times. If your relationship portfolio is thin, you're jacked. You're going to have a hard time. You're going to be surviving, and the people who are going to be thriving are the ones who are going to who have relationship portfolios that were established when risk is low. I'll pause there to see your thoughts.
No, that's good. I wrote down, what am I doing, or what are you doing, if asking it to the audience during good times to really build trust, right? Using those to really pour into those relationships. So when things do get bad, that team knows you're going to be there for them.
And that's a primal thing. If you think about it, like, this has been true for humans throughout history. And if you look at the bloodlines that run deep and thick, they are social animals. They are good at relationships. And I think relationships are a team sport right now. We need to, I see folks labeled as relationship manager and I'm like, really? Yeah. Is that, you've been trained in that? And we need to really take it seriously, because I think social capital is our greatest asset going into these tough times that we're going to be facing. And it certainly was for us during Pineapple. And I think it was a microcosm of what's coming. I think that the people who have that, and then the other thing that I would just say is kind of, again, this bias for execution, this bias for action, is that 70% you got to go, maybe 51% you got to go.
Yeah.
When a crisis rolls in and lives are at stake, or your livelihood's at stake, there's an art to getting what you can get, and then you got to execute, and then you got to figure the rest out as you go. Over communicate with each other, talk about what you're seeing as you're moving, pull up, reassess, get back in there and go again, and keep iterating in real time, because that is the essence of complexity. Is we're trying to make our way back toward order, right? We were tossed into chaos. We're moving through complexity back to order. The only way to do that is a bias for action and over communication as we do it.
Well, I appreciate you taking that action. It was I got to see you a little bit from afar. I saw you on national television quite a bit, talking about the work that you and so many other retired special ops people were doing to move people out of there. As we kind of wrap that up, and I would encourage everyone to go pick up the book. But Are there some lessons that we can learn, maybe as society, our elected officials, our military officials, from what we just went through with that?
Don't leave your friends. I mean, if you or I, Cody, had a habit of abandoning our friends whenever things got hard or whenever they were threatened, the way the United States has abandoned its allies since the Montagnards in Vietnam, you would have no social circle at all. In fact, our reputation would be devastated and people would move away from us. But yet somehow as a nation state, we allow realpolitik and this whole, nation states don't have a soul to drive those kinds of decisions. And I think as American citizens, we've got to put a stop to that. We've got to talk to our congressmen, we've got to talk to our elected officials, and we've got to demand that we're not going to do that, that we're not going to, what we learned in kindergarten really does hold true. Don't leave your friends. And whether that is in business, whether that is in, school or in national politics, international affairs, we have really developed a bad habit of this. So that would be that would be my first one. And then my second one is, I think careerism has become a real problem in this country. People are more worried about their careers and their status than they are doing the right thing when nobody's looking. And it's striking to me that not a single general officer or admiral retired when we committed the worst wholesale abandonment in our nation's history. And the level of complicity and accountability that has not been rendered on that is deafening. And I think that we need to demand more accountabilities from our senior leaders when they demonstrate careerism over doing what's morally right. And we got to change that, because that's going to take us off a cliff. These kind of moral injuries, we can't sustain it. We're already, trust is, let me ask you this, like social scientists generally agree that social capital, how we trust each other, institutions, and the stories we tell ourselves are essential to a stable democracy. I mean, how are we doing?
Not so good right now, are we, buddy?
Yeah. So I think accountability on our leadership to, particularly when careerism rears its ugly head, we got to really lean in on that, and we got to start addressing it with our junior leaders as well, and stomp that out, because there's no place for it.
That's good. Well, I appreciate all the work you're doing. I'm excited for everyone to be able to read this book and learn some of the lessons. Okay, you have time for just quick lightning round questions, some wrap-ups here at the end. Okay, as you look back, let's say since COVID hit, so over the last few years, is there a lesson that you've either learned or maybe one that was reinforced that you'll carry forward for the rest of your career life?
The quickest path to insanity is isolation. Without connection, we die.
It's a good one, especially I've seen that. You and I were talking a little bit about mental health and some of the challenges before we even started, and I think that's why we're seeing such an increase in that right now. So it's a good reminder for everyone to check in on your friends right now. So what's the one thing that you did that graduated you from being good in your profession to great?
I don't know that I did. I don't know that I've done that yet. But what I hope to do is I hope to do what my dad taught me, which is to leave tracks in the earth that are bigger than myself and that are talked about years after I'm gone, that served other people. And if that happens, then maybe I'll be counted in a category slightly better than what I am right now. But that's my goal, and what I'm trying to live into is to leave tracks, to leave indelible impressions in the earth that serve others at least 15 years after I'm gone. And so that's a big deal for me.
Oh, you're doing a good job at that, buddy. You got some good stuff going. Okay, third question. Is there one thing that you're doing this year to drive your own personal growth that you're excited about?
That's a great question. I love that question. Yes, I'm actually working on diaphragmatic breathing because I have a good bit of PTS and also survivor's guilt and a range of other things. I've found that diaphragmatic breathing, horizontal breathing, is a really powerful way to heal yourself, but also to bring your emotional temperature down. It makes you better to connect with other humans. There's a book by Dr. Belisa Varanich, V-R-A-N Varanich, V-R-A-N-I-C-H, called Breathing for Warriors. And it's phenomenal, but it's something that I'm taking very seriously, particularly as we get the play going again. And there's a lot of trauma in it. Diaphragmatic breathing in hard times is a game changer.
That's great. Well, this kind of leads into, so this may be the book, or maybe you have another one. I like to ask, what's the one book that you've recommended most to other leaders, business owners, etc.?
Oh, that's easy. War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
I just made my son read that this summer. So it's a great one. Okay,
Yeah.
Final question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Yeah, there's so much. You know, I guess I'm gonna go back to my dad, and it's leave tracks. Leave tracks. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all going to take a last breath, and most of us are going to, you know, unfortunately, it'll be a shallow breath, but a few people will get to take a big, full last breath, like my father-in-law did before he passed. And I'm convinced it was because he left tracks in this world and he knew it. And I think that's the most important thing we can do.
Great advice for all of us. Scott, my friend, again, thank you for your service, not only while you were actively in duty, but everything you've done over the last year to help people out. Second, maybe how can people learn more about you? I know I mentioned the podcast, but maybe give the official that, and just any other of the things that they should do to follow you.
Yeah, thanks. So the book comes out on August 30, Operation Pineapple Express, and it's on Amazon. You can pre-order it now, but it'll be out on August 30. We've got a website that I'm really excited about. It's called scottmann.com. And it has my whole body of work. It's got the play there. It's got stuff, you know, with speaking and storytelling and rooftop leadership and, you know, veteran transition. It's just like all of those passions rolled into one place that I think is really coherent. So I think that's probably the best place for people to go is scottmann.com. You can access the podcast there. It's a nice little one-stop shop for my crazy journey.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on the podcast with me, and for everyone who listens. As he said, go grab a copy of his new book, Operation Pineapple Express. You're going to love it. I got a little advanced copy, so I appreciate that also.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much, Cody, and thanks to everybody for what you do. And you know, fear is contagious, but so is leadership, and we need it more than ever.
Great way to end. Appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you.